Oklahoma Superintendent of Public Schools Ryan Walters mandated recently that all public schools in Oklahoma must incorporate the Bible into the curricula. Walters' exact words were, "Every teacher, every classroom in the state will have a Bible in the classroom and will be teaching from the Bible in class." He went on, "In Oklahoma, we are very proud to lead the country on pushing back on the leftists trying to rewrite history and say, no, we will teach from the Bible." He began by stating the mandate would focus on 5th through 12th grades with an emphasis on the Bible's influence in history and literature. But then he said that the Bible would also be woven across subjects including math and science, in which students could examine its influence on leading thinkers and ideas. And that biblical instruction could also be offered in younger grades when applicable. And he emphasized that every teacher across Oklahoma will be expected to have a copy of the Bible in the classroom. His decrees prompted a number of social media responses. My favorite involved some suggested math problems that we could create out of the Bible, such as this one based on the story from 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 3. King Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. If he lay with one wife or concubine every night, but took off 1 day per week for rest, how many days would it take him to lay with all of his wives and concubines? Or how about this one from 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 27. King David captured the foreskins of 200 Philistines. If David split those foreskins into baskets of 40 foreskins each, how many baskets would he need? Anyone who reads it knows that the Bible is filled with sex, drugs, and violence. There's rape, murder, adultery, misogyny, and incest throughout the Bible. Judging by Walter's standards for other books, it would seem the Bible needs to be banned from and not taught in our schools. Here's one more math problem that I think every Unitarian Universalist and science teacher would definitely want to use in order to broaden their students' minds about biology and arithmetic, but also about the ridiculousness of taking the Bible literally. There are 8.7 million animal species on Earth. If Noah took 2 of each of them onto the ark, how many square cubits of space would be required to accommodate all 17.4 million passengers? And remember, the lions and hippos need some room to move around, you know. To be honest, I don't think my Baptist neighbors want their children's Unitarian teachers to be teaching them the Bible any more than I know the Unitarian Universalist parents don't want the reverse. Not to mention that it is unconstitutional, and that bucket loads of tax dollars will be spent fighting this in court at a time when our schools are severely underfunded. Yes, yeah, you can plug that. By some reports, Oklahoma schools are 49th in the nation. It is criminal to be spending our time and our money on something so ideological and unconstitutional. The United States was not founded as a Christian nation. Only twice does the Constitution mention religion. And both times it makes it very clear that this country is secular. The first mention of religion is in the body of the Constitution in Article 6, which says, "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States." And the second and only other time that religion is mentioned is in the First Amendment, which reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." James Madison wrote this language specifically to ensure that in our country, religion is a matter of individual conscience and belief, and it should not be dictated or coerced by the government. The entire premise of government of the people, by the people, for the people is to create a logical system of laws, not a divine system of laws, a logical system of laws that will make society as productive and as fair as possible. Our founders believed that by creating such a system, a free and democratic people would have the ability to reach their potential and enjoy equal rights. The pursuit of happiness. Our country was founded at the height of the Enlightenment by some of the era's greatest thinkers and philosophers. Now, Enlightenment ideas, such as belief in reason and democracy, superseded ideas of faith and theocracy and monarchy. For them, a free society requires neutral institutions like the electoral system and the courts, which were created with the ideal of being fair to all involved. I understand, we all understand it's a little harder in practice than it is as an ideal, but that is the goal, to create neutral institutions of elections and courts, which hopefully will create fairness for everyone who's involved. And all that being said, it would be ahistorical and unrealistic to claim that religion in general and Christianity in particular were not significant influences in the formation of the United States. Cultural historian from the University of Virginia, James Davidson Hunter, in his book Democracy and Solidarity, explains how American culture has always involved an active tension between Enlightenment values and religious faith. From the Puritans on down to those religious voices such as Unitarians and Universalists who fought against slavery, advocated for women's rights and civil rights, the Bible has been central to the arguments of people like Frederick Douglass and Theodore Parker and Martin Luther King Jr. It also has been central in mass movements for prohibition and against abortion. In other words, each succeeding generation of Americans has had to figure out its own balance in this tension between Enlightenment ideals and religious authority. In his book, Hunter gives a great example from the 20th century. John Dewey, the humanist philosopher, who felt that reason was enough and there's no need for God and no need for religion. And theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, who in this same era argued that reason and science are not enough. He said we cannot educate away racism or educate away selfishness, that to quell human evil requires more than reason. However, even though these two debated the nature and the importance of God, they both agreed there is something called truth. They also agreed that it's important to have, as a nation, fairness and justice and some kind of moral order. So there was a general agreement, despite their ideological differences. They were both working from a common cultural framework that there is something called truth that we can rely on. There is something, that there is a need for fairness. Now, Dr. King, Martin Luther King Jr., may have been among the last of our public figures who effectively spoke to both sides of this American dialectic. He leaned on American Enlightenment values, when he spoke of the unpaid promissory note of the Declaration of Independence and the promise of life, liberty, and equality for all. And he also spoke from the biblical notion of the spark of God which resides in every person. Since Dr. King's assassination in 1968, our country has slowly drifted further and further into identity politics, where those who oppose each other are not just opponents, but they're enemies. As Fareed Zakaria writes in his new book, The Age of Revolutions, there are two contrasting narratives about the 1960s. In one, America was racist, patriarchal, and puritanical regarding sexuality until the brave, joyous protesters of the 1960s liberated us. And the other is of a golden age of patriotism and duty that was wrecked by draft-dodging, pot-smoking, hippies-turned-yuppie lowlifes. This was the onset of the rise of identity politics and the growing polarization that has come along with it. By the 1970s, the culture wars that divided this country were no longer about the Vietnam War and civil rights. It was now focused on abortion, contraception, feminism, and gay rights. How did this happen? It's important to understand that at the end of the civil rights movement and after the Vietnam War ended, many Southerners and Christian conservatives had lost their moral authority and their sense of moral superiority. They supported Jim Crow laws. They spat on little girls like Ruby Bridges who were trying to get into school. And they argued that black people are inferior. The country had deemed them wrong, really wrong, and their positions as immoral. So suddenly, they began to take up other issues to paint liberals as the immoral ones. Suddenly, abortion and contraception and homosexuality began to be heard in pulpits of churches for the first time. Those liberals were the ones corrupting our country. You see how they flipped the script? New York Times author David Brooks explains that people on the right and the left began to identify themselves with a particular kind of moral story. This is the story in which my political group is the victim of oppression and the other groups are oppressors. Now, there are those bad guys over there, and there are us good guys over here. That's the way people started to imagine themselves in their stories. The story provided a sense of belonging for people across their identities. It provided a sense of social recognition within our groups. And on the left, we have black folks and Native Americans and women and those in the LGBTQ plus communities and allies who are fighting for equality. And anyone who denies it is by definition bad. And on the right, there's a growing group of people who are predominantly white, many who identify with being from rural America, are often Christian, and also include many who are less educated, who feel that they are being oppressed by political and cultural elites who denigrate their culture, their values, and their way of life, and who want to eliminate or replace it. They say they don't feel like they belong anymore in their own country, and they resent it, and they want it back. The problem with identity politics is that it is undermining our democracy. It's destroying our sense of social cohesion. Democracy is based on the idea of debating opposing ideas to see which rise to the top. But if people believe those who disagree with them are threatening their way of life and their very existence, and they feel that they cannot be protected by our democracy, then the incentive to turn to violence or authoritarianism becomes more appealing and more likely. Ryan Walters Placing Bibles and the Ten Commandments in the schools is about planting a flag to mark the territory in this destructive battle. He is a Christian nationalist. These folks believe that America was given by God to white European Christians, and anything or anyone who challenges their dominance, the dominance of white European Christian culture, is seen as a threat. In America, of course, they are entitled to their opinion. They're entitled to try to make their case in the public square, but they are not entitled to force their opinions on anyone else. We have to push back. Yeah, you can applaud that. We have to push back because otherwise we'll lose our pluralistic democracy. We are a nation made up of people of all nations. So we have to find ways to push back that do not increase the polarization and that remain consistent with the values of democracy and the norms of our nation. So I'm planning to make this a central issue this year in my ministry and in this church. And I want you to join me and join us. We cannot let our children and our schools continue to be pawns in this culture war that is tearing apart our democracy and our system of public education. Our education system actually has real problems that need our time and our attention. We're 49th in the nation. Children aren't reading at grade level. Classroom sizes are too large. We can't find enough accredited teachers because we're not paying enough to our accredited teachers. There are real issues. When our action team goes out and talks to folks in the community about what their needs are, nobody said anything about Bibles in schools. They said they need things like, making sure that all their kids have enough nutrition, that they have enough supplies, that we have enough textbooks and teachers. There's things like that we don't think about, like stray dogs in neighborhoods that get kids to be scared to go to school because they're scared of the dogs, so they stay home. And then we have truancy and the kids aren't going to school. So there's real issues our children are facing, and yet we're over here talking about Bibles and the Ten Commandments. So I don't want us to be distracted. This is all just a distraction technique that's trying to get us to take our eye off the prize, which is our children and our education system and our democracy. So it's our work in our generation to reestablish a healthy balance in this tension between Enlightenment ideals and religious morality. I was talking to a friend this summer about the conflict in the Middle East, and he described it this way. He said, it really feels like it's a proxy war between Iran and militant Islamic fundamentalism and America and freedom and democracy, and that it's all playing out there in Gaza and Israel. And then another friend said, when I see the controlling of American women's bodies across the United States, and the banning of books, and the introduction of religion in the public schools, and the backlash against LGBTQ plus communities here at home, I'm beginning to wonder how much longer we will be much different than the images that we have of militant Islamic fundamentalists. We're starting to look a lot more like that right here with militant Christian fundamentalism. So if you're wondering why All Souls would engage in this fight, you may have noticed that a lot of public schools all across the United States and right here in Oklahoma are named after famous Unitarians. There's Emerson, there's Thoreau, there's Horace Mann, right? That's because our forebears, including Elizabeth Peabody and many others, were pivotal in the establishment of public education in the United States in the 19th century. This congregation was pivotal in the ending of segregation in Tulsa public schools in the 60s and 70s. We were also the first church in Tulsa to adopt a school in the Partner School Initiative back in the 90s. And I served on the Tulsa Public Schools Superintendent's Faith Leaders Council in the 2000s. This church, yes. This church has always supported free and fair public education. We feel it is essential to a thriving democracy and a healthy nation. So as our children go back to school, let us have their backs. I can't tell you how grateful I am to be a part of a community that's making a difference, that cares about their children, that doesn't just sit at home feeling apathetic, that does more than just vote, but also organizes to make a difference right here at home. I love you, thank you, and amen.
Careful the spell you cast, not just on children. Sometimes the spell may last past what you can see and turn against you. Careful the tale you tell, that is the spell. Children will listen.